Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Mission Matters. My name is Adam Torres, and if you'd like to apply to be a guest on the show, just head on over to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. All right, so today I have Wes Barefoot on the line, and he is president of Path to Freedom. Wes, welcome to the show.
Adam, thanks, man. Great to be here. Been looking forward to it.
All right, man. So I love having fellow podcasters on the show, but for those that haven't maybe been watching this show for that long or they're newer to the platform, Wes and I have worked together many times. I've been on his show. It's been on my show. Now, I think this is the second time. I'm losing track, but
Yep.
always a pleasure to have Wes on the line. So, hey, just want to say again, thank you for coming back on the show and supporting us.
The pleasure's all mine.
All right, Wes. So we got a topic today, and this is a good one. So I'll say we're doing some myth busting. We're going to talk a lot about franchise ownership. So who should own a franchise? Who shouldn't? Should you own a franchise, go that route, work with the proven process, or should you start a startup from scratch in terms of your own concept, your own idea, and start all those processes? I mean, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. We'll go into the ins and outs, the pros and cons of both sides.
Yep.
But before we do that, we'll start this episode like we start them all with our Mission Matters Minute. So, Wes, we at Mission Matters, we amplify stories for entrepreneurs, executives, and experts. So that's our mission here. Wes, what mission matters to you?
Well, first of all, Adam, I love the mission that you're carrying out, and it ties in very closely to my mission. So at Path to Freedom, I'm all about helping people take more control of their lives and create freedom for themselves through business ownership. And as you've already referenced, my specialty is franchise business ownership. And I had huge positive impacts in my life through franchise ownership. I was very fortunate at an early age to get introduced to franchising and to own my first franchise business. And the impact that has had on my life and my family's
Yeah.
life has been tremendous in so many different ways. And so, that's where my mission at Path to Freedom is to help anyone out there that has the goal of becoming a business owner, or that may even already be a business owner and is just looking to expand and diversify, to help them understand franchising, help them figure out if it is an avenue that makes sense for them to explore, help them get clear on the right type of franchise business for them, and then guide them through the research that they need to do to make a confident decision whether or not a particular franchise business is right for them. Something I enjoy doing, and I really like connecting with great people and giving them a methodical approach to what would be a very overwhelming process for most to go through on their own.
Awesome. So Wes, I don't want to, for the viewers that didn't catch that first episode, you mentioned something just now, and that is how franchising and being a franchise owner has made such a difference in your life. Now, so obviously with Path to Freedom, you're helping others, but maybe give us a little bit of the backstory. Like, how did you get involved in this business, and like what did your path look like to this freedom?
Yeah, it's I think a pretty interesting story. I mean, first of all, I fell backwards into franchising. I didn't intentionally get into franchising. I didn't know a thing about franchising. Like
Yeah,
many people, when I heard the term franchising, I thought fast food. I thought McDonald's, Subway,
for
some of the big
sure.
names that we all know. But I ended up working for a franchisor that was not in the food industry, relatively small at the time, and happened to have been founded in the town I was living in. I was a couple of years out of college at this point, and seemed like a cool opportunity. I met the founders. Long story short, ended up working with them, got into a franchise sales and development role. So I was the guy that people were talking to that had an interest in learning about that particular franchise opportunity and seeing if it was a good fit for them. So I learned what that whole process needs to look like. But all of a sudden, I was surrounded by entrepreneurial minded people. I'm talking to people all over the country that are looking at business opportunities for themselves. I'm working closely with the founders of this company that had not only started their own business, but now they were franchising it and creating business opportunities for other people. And so naturally, it really got my wheels turning. And pretty quickly into that, my wife and I realized that, we wanted to be business owners ourselves, and that franchising would likely be a great way for us to do that. So I ended up going to work for another franchisor. Around that time, my wife was in pharmaceutical sales. She was pregnant with our first child, our daughter, who's almost 5 now. Went out on maternity leave, and her company did a big restructuring. they laid off about 50% of the sales force across the country. And even though she was out on maternity leave, she was included in that layoff. It was a
Mm-hmm.
scary time, thinking back on it. We went from two incomes to one, had just had our first child. We're trying to, figure out how to keep this small child alive. And we didn't know what was next, right? So,
Yeah.
but through everything I was learning about franchise ownership, I knew that was something that we could be successful at if we found the right franchise. And so we did. We started our first franchise business. We still own that business today.
Mm-hmm.
It's grown into a 7-figure plus business, very successful. It's given us great financial resources, but more than anything, it's given us an amazing quality of life. It's given us a lot more control over not only our livelihood, but also our time. And it's given us a lot of that freedom that I think so many people out there are looking for. Since then, we've gone on to invest in another franchise business, which we are building and scaling as we speak. And while I spend most of my time working in Path to Freedom with the consulting clients that I have, part of our personal long-term growth strategy is to continue investing in franchise businesses where we can build out teams, delegate to them, work on the business, not in the business. And that's a big part of our long-term wealth building strategy. And so I'm able to, help the people that I'm working with in part by sharing my experience and what we've learned as we've been charting our own path to freedom and what we're continuing to learn.
So, Wes, I want to take you back to when, let's just say, you were just getting started there. So you're working, you're selling franchise, and for another franchisor, right? You're working within their context of their system.
Yeah.
Like, do you remember that point? And there may not be a moment, but that point in time when you're like, man, I love this, because you fell in love with it at some point. And I don't know if it was that early on, but what was that point?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that there was an exact point, but it didn't take long. It wasn't very long into it that, it opened my eyes to this whole other way of doing business. And I'd spent a couple of years out of college working for a Fortune 500 company. I'd spent a few years trying to climb the corporate ladder, and I'd pretty quickly realized that that just wasn't what I wanted to do long term. But again, I didn't have a lot of knowledge on franchising until I kind of fell into it. And so I don't know exactly where that point was, but it didn't take long. And then the
Yeah.
more I continue to learn about franchising and understanding it, it's such a great model. And the reason for that is when it's done right, if you own a franchise business, you're in business for yourself. It's your business, but
Yeah.
you're not in business by yourself. You have support. You have essentially a business partner in the franchisor, and you have all these other franchisees across the country, in some cases across the world, that are operating the same business as you. And so there's that shared learning that can happen within a good franchise organization, so that if you run into an issue in your business as a franchise owner, chances are one of the other franchisees, probably many of the other franchisees out there, have run into the same issue and they can help. So it's a beautiful way of getting started as a business owner, or for
Yeah.
existing business owners to grow and expand and diversify.
All right, Wes. So I have to say this. I don't typically answer my own questions here, but I got to tell you, when I fell in love with franchising, and no, I don't own one, and who knows, maybe that's down the line. But I
Maybe.
remember I was a kid, and I still remember when I understood like the concept of, wow, I could own this too. So
Yeah.
growing up as a kid in Michigan, we had the Pistons basketball, and then we had Little Caesars Pizza. And when I realized,
Yeah.
and we're talking 80s here, right? And when
Hmm.
I remember like seeing the little picture hanging and asking my dad what that was, and he's like, oh, well, this is a franchise, and he explained it, and I was like, wait a minute, so I can grow up and I can make pizzas. I was young, and that's a
Sure.
very early story on franchising, but I was like, wait a minute, I can do this too. And I thought about it, and I always remember that story. But as I got older and I was deciding, startup versus franchise, things like that, I know there's pros and cons to both, but just to, I guess, transition our conversation from pizza. um, let's get into the conversation from the standpoint of, first, on the personal side, on your end. I'd like to start there. Is like, why did the idea of a franchise like match your psyche? I feel like there's a certain type of person that's like, wait a minute, like this makes sense. Like, what
Yeah.
was that draw to you initially?
Yeah, and I think I had an advantage
Yeah.
in terms of when we invested in our first franchise ourselves, because I had been working in franchising for a while.
Yeah.
I'd helped quite a few people get into franchise businesses themselves at that point. So I had an understanding of, why it does make sense to
Mhm.
invest in a franchise. And the big part is it gives you the ability to run faster, right?
Mhm.
In all likelihood, investing in the right franchise for you, it's going to put you on a path to ramp the business up much quicker.
Yeah.
There's certainly nothing wrong with startups. We've started
Mhm.
businesses that are not franchises. I've worked with many people that are very successful entrepreneurs in their own
Yeah.
right, and they've built amazing businesses. But what they know is it takes a lot of time to put
Mhm.
all the different pieces in place that you need to, in some cases, even be able to start operating the business, right? To
Yeah.
even put yourself in a position to start generating revenue. And you also make a ton of mistakes along the way. There's usually a lot of trial and error in a startup, and that costs time. It also
Mhm.
costs money. So in the right franchise, there's a much shorter learning curve,
Yeah.
because you have the systems, the processes, you have the kind of the blueprint that the franchisor is giving you. And as I've already mentioned, you have the other franchisees that you can learn from. And so, personally, what we've done in less than 5 years, go on to build a 7-figure plus business that's very profitable,
Mhm.
as well as start a second franchise business that's well on its way to being a 7-figure business.
Mhm.
I don't know that we could have done all of that in a 5-year period if we were going about it on our own.
I love that you say that 5 years too, because I feel like for most businesses that are startups and, assuming you're not well, maybe even this and even a funded startup, all these other things, it's gonna take a solid 5 years. I look at
Yeah,
this business, even Mission Matters, right? First couple of years getting the product right, getting distribution right, all that stuff, and we're finally starting to really, like, cook, and rock and roll
sure.
over here, but that's, year 5 we're going on. So I think about if I could have gone a franchise route with the business, that that runway wouldn't have been probably nowhere near as long, but maybe not also as painful because there've been some people that also had done some of the things prior, and maybe there was a process out there, and I didn't have to make that particular mistake because it
Yeah.
was already figured out for me. Now, I guess the other side of this, and I guess we should also say this in the beginning, when you are just to set the stage for those that aren't that familiar with franchising, a franchise is a type of startup from the standpoint of you're starting a new business, so
Absolutely.
it's not like you're all the work's done for you. Maybe go into
Exactly.
that part of the conversation before we go further.
Yeah, it's a really good point that needs to be raised, right? Because I,
Hmm.
I think some people do have the misconception that, hey, if I invest in a franchise, the business is just going to kind of fall into my lap. And
Yeah.
that's not the case. The framework is there, the blueprint to
Hmm.
follow to build the business, to, as I mentioned, avoid some of the pitfalls that
Yeah.
you'd likely fall into if you didn't have that guidance from the franchisor and the other
Hmm.
franchisees. But the work still has to be done. I'll
Yeah.
give you a very quick analogy that I heard early in my career in franchising that has stuck with me. And I think it's the best way to summarize the relationship between a franchisor and the franchisee.
Yeah.
So think of it as a bicycle, right? It's the franchisor's job to build the bike,
Hmm.
right? And so depending on what you're looking for in a bike, you may want something that can go really fast. You may want something that could be a trail bike or a mountain bike. I mean, there's all different
Hmm.
types of bikes out there, and they all have their own kind of purpose, right? The franchisor's job is to build the best bike they possibly can.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how nice the bike is, it goes nowhere unless the owner of the bike gets on it and pedals. And the harder you pedal, the faster you pedal, the
Yeah.
further the bike goes. So, as the franchise owner, you got to pedal your ass off to make sure that
Yeah.
the bike's going where you want it to go. You also have to steer it in the right direction, right, to get to the destination that you want to go to. So I'm glad you brought that point up, Adam, because it is an important thing to understand. This is not a passive investment, right? We can talk
Hmm.
about different types of franchise ownership because there certainly are franchises that
Yeah.
are designed to be more passive of an investment than others, but it's not going to be completely passive.
Before we get into types of franchises, let's get into maybe types of people, if you will.
Yeah.
So, like for example, is this I know not every different franchise is going to be different, and I don't mean and so in terms of the people part, like who have you found are typically good fits or people that are looking for that type of opportunity?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's kind of a broad answer because there
Yeah.
are so many people that owning a franchise could be right for. So I'll
Mhm.
give you some examples of people that I've worked with and helped get into franchise businesses through Path to Freedom. So work with a lot of people that spent most of their career in corporate America, and for one reason or
Mhm.
another, they're just over it. Right? They've always kind of had this idea in the back of their mind of it'd be great to own my own business and be
Yeah.
my own boss, and whether they got laid off and they're in transition mode or they finally just got burnt out and had enough,
Mhm.
there's amazing franchise opportunities out there for people in that boat. And the skill set that someone would typically develop throughout a
Mhm.
career in corporate America translates very well to the role of a franchise owner in the
Mhm.
vast majority of franchise businesses. And we can kind of circle back to that as we talk about different types of franchises. Um, I've worked with a lot of high level executives, right, that have a great
Mhm.
career. They have great income. They have great benefits. They're not interested in walking away from that. They have
Yeah.
no reason to. They don't have that pain as kind of the first category of person
Mhm.
that I just referenced, but they love the idea of
Mhm.
diversifying. They're always looking for investment opportunities. They love the idea of having a secondary or maybe even a third income
Mhm.
stream while building an asset that they could potentially sell down the road. And that's where some of the more passive franchise opportunities come
Mhm.
into the picture. There certainly are franchise businesses out there where it's very feasible. In fact, in some cases, it's encouraged that the franchise owner is not full time working in the business, right? They're
Yeah.
more of a high level, kind of somewhat passive owner, and they're leveraging managers and a team and things of
Mhm.
that nature. So a lot of great opportunities for the person that loves their career but is just looking for other
Mhm.
investment opportunities where they have a little more control over the outcome, versus the market or 401ks or things of this nature.
Yeah.
And then the other category is going to be existing business owners. We've already referenced this a lot, and a
Mhm.
lot of people might think, well, hey, I'm an entrepreneur. I built my own business, right? I did it the
Yeah.
hard way. I didn't take easy street and do a franchise. Um,
Which is a
those
myth, by the way, which is a myth.
Right. It is. And look, those people in particularly, these
Mhm.
entrepreneurs that have already done it themselves,
Mhm.
they're the ones that really understand and grasp
Yeah.
the value of a good franchise and the fact that so much of this is already in place, and it's really just following the system
Mhm.
and following the processes and leveraging all of the resources that the
Mhm.
franchisor makes available to the franchisees. So, I've worked with a lot of business owners that have had tremendous success in their own businesses, yet
Mhm.
they want more. They want another business. They want to diversify. Maybe they want to
Yeah.
add something that's complementary to what they're already doing, but they don't want to spend another 10, 15, 20 years building it from scratch. They want something that, as I mentioned earlier, is going to give them the ability to run faster. So those are kind of I would say the key categories of people
Mhm.
that I've worked with. I'll also add this in, Adam, and then we can move on if you'd like. But there are people out there that I believe owning a franchise is not right for.
Mm.
Right? I mean, with a franchise, you are part of a system, right? It's your business, you own it, but there is a franchise agreement in place.
Mhm.
There are certain things that you're going to be required to do, and you are going to be required to operate the business within the parameters that the franchisor has set. Now, not all franchises are as rigid as some, right? I think a
Mhm.
lot of people think of, well, if I'm a franchise owner, I'm basically going to be a robot, and the franchisor is going to dictate everything I do and everything I say. Not the case in all franchises. There's plenty of
Yeah.
franchises out there where someone that is very entrepreneurial
Mhm.
can still follow the system, still leverage all the resources, and they can put their entrepreneurial hat on, and they can think outside of the box, and they can put their own touch to the business. So I don't want people to think it's so rigid that you can't
Mhm.
have any creativity or autonomy. But if you're so entrepreneurial where listening to someone else and taking advice from someone
Mhm.
else and following, at least the framework of a system is going to be a challenge for you,
Yeah.
then probably owning a franchise is not right for you.
Oh man, that when you as soon as you said that, that movie, The Founder, popped in my head for
Yeah.
the early McDonald's and
Yeah.
all the different food they were serving.
Yeah. It
What
was
a
wild,
great
wasn't it?
scene. That's like,
Yeah.
I
It's a
feel like
good
that's
movie, and it's also a good example of
yeah,
I think maybe we'll talk about this
yeah,
later on, but you know, good franchisors,
yeah.
they really know who they're looking for in their franchisees.
Mm,
And McDonald's early on, as the movie The Founders showed, they didn't know who they were looking for as their
no.
franchisees. A lot of those early franchisees were not the right fit, and they're certainly not the type of franchisees that McDonald's of today is looking for.
Yeah, for sure. I had to bring that up though. What a
It's a
classic.
great
I feel
movie,
like there's got to be some classic franchise memes there, right? I feel like it's out
no
there
doubt.
somewhere in the community.
No
So
doubt.
let's I wanna go a little bit deeper into Path to Freedom. So obviously you're an expert in what you're doing, and of course you're helping people with franchising. But tell us a little bit more directly. So what exactly do you do at Path to Freedom?
Yeah, thanks. So my process is very consultative, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I'm a big believer that, what's the right franchise for me is not necessarily the right franchise for you, Adam. I mean, using the bike analogy from earlier, a business is a vehicle, right?
Mm,
Everyone is at a certain place in their life and everyone has a certain destination that they're trying to get to.
mm,
So, depending on where they are and where they're trying to go, the vehicle's not going to be the same for everyone, right?
yeah.
So, for me to really add value to the people that I'm working with, we have to spend some time on the front end of the process, really making sure we're clear on what are you looking to accomplish through owning a business or owning another business.
Mhm.
What do you want your role as the owner to be? We've already alluded to the fact that different franchise models are going to have different expectations of how the
Mm,
franchise owner is spending their time, right? So we got to get clear on that. We got to get clear on the characteristics of a franchise business that are going to
mhm,
be most appealing to the individual I'm working with. As we
mhm.
get clear on these things, then we can really start to narrow down a list of some actual franchises that line up with what someone is looking for. This is a very overwhelming process for most people to try to take on their own, simply because most people don't know where to get started. If you just
Yeah,
start searching the internet for franchise opportunities, there are thousands upon
yeah.
thousands upon thousands,
That's
and it's
scary.
it's overwhelming. Yeah.
Yeah.
And look, like anything in life, franchising, not all franchisors are created equally, right? There's
Mhm,
great franchises out there. Honestly,
mhm.
Adam, there are franchises out there that have no business being a franchise, right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't invest in them. I would never recommend to someone else that they invest in them. And then
Mhm,
there's everything in between. And then, as I mentioned, even if it's a great franchise itself, does not
mm,
necessarily mean it's right for every single person that wants to own a franchise. So,
yeah.
my goal is to really just give people a methodical approach to make sure they're going through this process the right way. They're identifying franchise businesses that actually line up with what they're looking for in a business
Mhm,
and are well suited to help them accomplish their short term and long
mhm,
term goals. And so we have a process that we go through. I have relationships with hundreds of franchise
mhm,
companies across a wide variety of industries, as well as across a wide range of initial investments. And that's
mhm,
something, we should talk about later is how much capital should you expect to have to invest in a franchise. For
mhm,
many, it's a lot less than what most people think.
mm,
So we get clear on all of these things. And a lot of my time is also spent developing relationships with these
mhm,
franchise companies, making sure that one, trust and know that they are
yeah,
good franchises, that they're actually going to do what they say they're going to do to support their
mhm,
franchisees, and that they actually have other franchisees that have built very successful
mm,
businesses. Right. So I'm making sure that if I'm in a position where I'm introducing
mhm,
someone to a franchise and saying, hey, based on everything I've learned about you and what you're looking to accomplish, I think
yeah,
this particular franchise could be a really good fit. Let's learn more about it. I want to make sure it's legit, right?
mhm,
But I also spend a lot of time understanding, what is a particular franchise looking for, or I should
mhm,
say, who is a particular franchise looking for in their
mhm,
franchisees. So as I'm working with the individual, we're getting clear on all of these things. We're narrowing it down. And then as I leverage the knowledge and relationships I have with the many franchise companies that I work for, I'm able to kind of match people up. So think of that as the first phase of the process. The second phase of the process, once we've actually got a short list of brands that, really check all the boxes of what someone's looking for, well, then they've got to do some due diligence. They've got to do the research. And any good franchisor is going to have a very structured, very thorough process that someone can work through to get all their questions answered, to understand the business, to understand what it takes to be successful, crunch the numbers, make sure the ROI potential is there, so that ultimately they can make a very educated as well as a confident decision whether or not that franchise is the right fit for them. So I really try to work closely with my clients as they get to that point in the process, to coach them, guide them through that process. I can't do the research for them, but this is the process I was managing when I worked for franchisors, right? This is the same process that my wife and I have gone through in the franchises we've invested in. We've also gone through the process with franchise companies we've decided not to invest in. So I can add a lot of value to the people I work with just in terms of guiding them through that process, because the unfortunate thing is, Adam, most people buy franchise businesses the wrong way. My goal is to make sure that they don't do that. And in some cases that results in they don't buy a franchise at all, because going through this process with me, they realize that owning a business or owning a franchise is not actually the best fit for them. But what I can tell you is the vast majority of the time, if I'm working with someone that is genuinely interested in getting into business for themselves, we can find a franchise that's a great fit for them, that meets the capital requirements that they would have in terms of how much capital they can invest in the franchise. And we can help them get into a great franchise business and start charting their own path to freedom.
So types of franchises. I I used a couple of food examples, like my early on when I was a kid, Little Caesars. I can own a pizza place, right? That was awesome to me. We also referenced the founder of the movie, so we referenced McDonald's. But in the beginning of this interview, you mentioned that's one of the big myths. It doesn't have to be restaurant or food related. So if you don't have experience in those either way, it doesn't matter. There's a lot of different things. So talk to me a little bit more about the types of franchises.
Yeah, this is a big, I don't know if misconception is the right word, but I just find a lot of people.
I think it is. That's the right word.
Yeah. I mean, people tend to think of food businesses when they think of franchising, and it's understandable. I mean, don't fact check me on this, because I'm not sure if the numbers are that accurate, but I want to say there's close to 4,000 franchise opportunities in the US today, somewhere in that ballpark. Roughly half of those are food businesses, right? So obviously the food sector within franchising is massive. It's very prominent. However, that also means there are thousands of franchise opportunities that are non-food franchises, right? So, a lot of people do business on a regular basis with franchise companies without even realizing it. I mean, automotive care, senior care, childhood education and childhood services, home services, home improvement, massive in terms of franchise opportunities. Fitness, health and wellness. I mean, the list goes on, but there are many, many options outside of food. And, if you want to, we can kind of get into why a lot of people would not be interested in investing in a food franchise. Number one, the capital requirements tend to be very high, primarily due to the real estate and either having to build a location or upfit a location. So a lot of these other franchise opportunities either don't require real estate at all, so that keeps the initial investment and the capital that's required much lower, or the real estate that's needed is not anywhere as extensive as what you would be looking for a typical restaurant. The build out, the upfit, any of that's not going to be as extensive either. So, that's where we get into some of the franchise opportunities that are much more affordable in terms of how much capital is needed to get them started and get them open. And a lot of these businesses are still very, very scalable, meaning they can be grown into very large, very lucrative businesses, even if they don't require the same amount of capital that, a traditional food franchise might.
It makes sense, and I guess the next part of that, and we've mentioned it, a couple times here, but I think it's time to bring to bring it out is like cost. So you mentioned like on the food side, it might cost a little bit more. Like,
Mhm.
not asking you for the cost of any particular one, but just to give people an idea of what that even looks like, especially if somebody's watching this for the first time and never really considered franchises at all. Because in my mind, all I remember is, again, relating back to food, is it's going to be $1 million minimum or this or that. Like, I've heard big numbers, but
Yeah.
there's other opportunities, right?
Absolutely. So let's give a little bit of background here to set the
Yeah.
stage for this. First of all, one of the beautiful things about researching franchises, if you're in
Hmm.
the United States, is that the franchising sector is regulated by the Federal Trade Commission. Okay.
Mm.
So this means that franchisors have to go through an official process to actually be able to offer franchise opportunities. And there's
Ah.
all this documentation and all this data that has to be provided, and it also has to be updated at minimum once a year, right?
Mm.
So there's some key financial information in these documents that are going to help someone that's researching a franchise, especially from a how much is
Mhm.
this going to cost and how much do I have the potential to earn in this
Yeah.
particular franchise business. So any franchisor is going to give you what they call an estimated initial investment range. And
Mhm.
I'm not trying to take us too deep into the weeds, but this is
Yeah.
important to answer the question that you asked.
Mhm.
That initial investment range includes three different buckets of cost, if you will. The
Mhm.
first is the initial franchise fees. So that's what you pay upfront to the franchisor to
Yeah.
become a franchisee. If it's a territory based franchise, that secures your territory. The other bucket is going to be any expenses that you would likely incur to get the business open. Okay. So that's
Mm.
to get to where you are operating and you are in a position to start generating revenue. All right.
Mhm.
And then the third bucket is working capital that the franchisor wants to see a brand new franchisee have on
Mm.
hand. Most franchisors are going to have at least 3 months of operating or working capital
Mhm.
on hand once you open. So that's important to understand, right? Because if you hear a franchise say, "Hey, our initial investment range is 250 to $300,000," that does
Yeah.
not necessarily mean you're writing a check for that amount up front just to become a franchisee.
Mhm.
So another important thing to understand to answer this question is that the franchise fees, right, that initial fee that you pay up
Yeah.
front, those are pretty standard across the board, regardless
Mm.
of what type of franchise we're looking at, right? Um, 50 to $60,000 is
Mhm.
kind of par for the course right now.
Mm.
So it doesn't matter if you're looking at a McDonald's or a service-based franchise that can be run
Yeah.
from home. The franchise fees are going to be standard. So the primary reason that one franchise may require $1 million in capital and one
Mhm.
may require $100,000 in capital is the infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
What do you need to get the business open? Real estate, build out, equipment, vehicles, inventory, all of these things get factored in. Okay.
Mhm.
So there are franchises out there that are legitimate franchise opportunities that you can get into all in for as little as $60 to $75,000.
Mm.
Now, those are the types of franchises that I would refer to as owner operator
Mhm.
franchises. And one way to think about it is you're kind of buying yourself a job, right?
Yeah.
These
So you're
businesses
your
are
own boss.
you're your own boss, right? These types of franchises are not usually designed to be scalable. They're
Mhm.
usually set up so that the franchisee kind of is the business. He or she
Mhm.
wears all the different hats in the business,
Mhm.
but they're affordable. They're usually
Yeah.
home-based businesses. Think consulting, think travel agency, think recruiting, things of this nature. You don't need a location, you don't need equipment, inventory, employees, any of that.
Yeah.
Great options for the person that hates working for someone else,
Mhm.
wants to make a good living, but
Mhm.
doesn't mind doing the work themselves as the
Mhm.
business owner. Okay.
Yeah.
From there, we go into service based franchises, right?
Mhm.
Service based franchises cover a wide range in terms of different types of businesses or
Mhm.
industries. I mentioned earlier home improvement, home services, there's B2B
Mhm.
services, there's childhood education. I already listed a bunch of different types, but
Yeah.
service based businesses are going to be franchises that either don't require a location at all, or the location is not a destination, meaning clients don't come to that location to purchase a product or a service.
Mm.
So realistically, a good service-based franchise is probably going to be anywhere from $100 to $150,000, maybe up to $200,000, all in initial investment. And the caveat to that is these types of businesses are usually territory-based. Many people like the idea of starting with multiple territories, which obviously takes that initial investment up a little bit. The difference between these service-based franchises and some of the owner-operator franchises I referenced earlier is that these businesses are designed to be scalable, right? They're the type of business where the primary role of the franchise owner is to build and manage a team, right? Where you've got a team of people out there that you can delegate to that are carrying on the day-to-day activities in the business. You as the owner may be right in the middle of all of that in the beginning, but long-term, the goal is to continue scaling the business, and you as the owner phase yourself out so that you're working more on the business instead of in the business. So there are many, many great franchise opportunities that literally you can get up and running for $100,000, $150,000 and can still ultimately be a 7-figure plus business with great margins. Because the thing with these service-based businesses is they're usually very lean. They're usually very low overhead. So the earning potential is quite strong in most cases. From there, we graduate to retail franchises. Okay. So retail is going to be what most people traditionally think of. You have a brick and mortar location and it is a destination. Your clients come to you to purchase a product or a service, right? I kind of have it classified two different ways: light retail and heavy retail. Light retail is going to be smaller footprint, probably not as extensive of a build out, probably not too equipment or inventory heavy. So $250,000 to $500,000 kind of all-in initial investment is going to be kind of common. Think boutique fitness, think, health and beauty, spa, massage, these types of things. A lot of great options. And this is where a lot of the kind of what you'll hear referred to as semi-absentee ownership models are, where realistically the owner can keep their full-time job if that's what they want to do, start this franchise on the side, have a manager, have a team in place that's running the location. They're kind of managing big picture. And then you graduate into the heavy retail. That's going to be, what we referenced earlier, the food franchises we all think about, hotels, gas stations, things of this nature. And that's where you get into the, well over $500,000, in many cases, well over 7-figure investment in terms of the capital that's needed.
That's awesome. And what a great overview, Wes. I feel like you encapsulated so much in this episode that if some of the people that are watching this live or that caught this towards the tail end, they definitely want to start from the beginning, because you essentially taught a master class on franchising in a half an hour or so. So this has been great. But I do want to, before we end this, I want you to talk a little bit more about your podcast. Because we just scratched the surface on your knowledge. I feel like anybody that watched any of this knows you got a whole lot more to give. So Path to Freedom podcast, tell us a little bit more about that and the content that my listeners, when they go over and check it out, can expect.
Yeah. So thanks for bringing up the podcast. It's something I've had a lot of fun doing. Adam's been a guest on the podcast. That was a lot of fun. But no, I started the podcast shortly after I started, my consulting business, Path to Freedom. And I wanted it to be a platform where anyone that, has that desire to be a business owner, but they don't quite know how to get started, or for the existing small business owner that is just looking for ways to grow and looking for ways to get better. I wanted to create a platform where they could learn from other entrepreneurs that are maybe further ahead of where the listeners are today. I was intentional in the beginning. I did not want it to be only about franchising. So obviously, based on the conversation we've had today, franchising is a recurring topic for sure on the podcast. I've shared a lot of my personal experience. I share a lot of the process that I take the clients that I work with through, things that we've really just touched on today. And I've had a lot of amazing guests on the show that are very involved in franchising, founders of franchise companies, franchisees, executives in franchise organizations, funding people, franchise attorneys, etc. But that being said, I've had many other guests that are very successful entrepreneurs that have never done anything in franchising in their life. And that's because the underlying goal for Path to Freedom is just to help people take more control of their life and create freedom for themselves through business ownership, right? There's a lot of ways to get into business for yourself. Franchising, I truly believe, is a fantastic way for so many people, and many people that probably don't even realize it themselves. But it's not the only way. There's so many ways that you can get into business for yourself. And so the goal is really just to create a platform where people can come, they can learn from other entrepreneurs that are currently charting their own path to freedom. And so those people out there that are looking to create more freedom in their own lives, you know, they can have a platform to learn how others are doing it.
And so for people that are watching this right now that are interested in learning more about Path to Freedom because they want to explore the franchise opportunity,
Yeah.
or they want to watch the podcast, or just connect with you and your brand overall, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, thanks. Best way is, you know, one, you can check out the website. It's www.path2frdm.com. So it's Path to Freedom, but short form for freedom. I'm assuming we'll link that somewhere to make it easy for people. There's a link to the podcast there. I've put up some other resources as well, you know, kind of answering some frequently asked questions about franchising, some more background information on me and my family. And there's a contact form. So what I would say is, if anyone out there, you know, if this sparked an interest and you said, hey, maybe I should learn more about franchising. One thing I didn't mention, Adam, is the way my business model is structured at Path to Freedom. My services are completely free to the individuals that I work with. Whether you buy a franchise or not, at the end of the process, you never pay a dime. That's the beautiful thing about my business model. So I'm happy to talk to anyone, even if it's just very exploratory, to answer some questions for you, help you figure out if franchise ownership is worth you investing more time to learn about. So there's a contact form on the website. You can also email me directly. That's just Wes, WES, at path2frdm.com. So I'd love to talk with anyone. Podcast is out there on any of the major podcast platforms. It's Path to Freedom, number 2. And just trying to put as much valuable content out there as we can, and trying to talk to as many people as I can and help them understand franchising and see if it could, you know, have the same impact in their life that it's had in mine.
Fantastic. And what a great advocate and leader you are in that industry, and always a pleasure again to have you on the show. So thank you for coming back on.
Absolutely.
And to the audience, as always, especially if you're a first-time listener or viewer, hit that subscribe button. We have many more mission-based entrepreneurs, executives, and experts coming on, and they have much more knowledge and topics, and we got a lot more coming up for you. A lot of great interviews planned. So hit that subscribe button. We definitely want you to come back. And Wes, as always, a pleasure. Can't wait to the next one.
Thanks, Adam. Always a blast chatting with you, man.